They kicked her out of first class for a white man. By the time they landed, the entire crew was out of a job. It happened just after she closed her laptop. Danielle Monroe had arrived early, gate 27B at Louis Armstrong Airport in New Orleans, waiting for her flight to San Francisco. She liked to be ahead of schedule, never liked being rushed. She had too much riding on this trip. Her seat was 1A, first class, window. She picked it herself, not because of the view. Danielle liked knowing no one would need to climb over her during the flight. Peace, space, a little control, in a world that often tried to take it from her. She was dressed sharp, not flashy, just tailored. A navy blue pantsuit, clean white sneakers, and a braided updo that never moved out of place, no matter how long the day was. She looked like someone who knew exactly where she was going, and more importantly, how she was going to get there. The boarding process was smooth, no delays. She scanned her pass, smiled at the gate agent, and walked onto the plane like she'd done 100 times before. Danielle placed her carry-on neatly overhead, slid into her seat, and let out a breath. This was her moment to decompress before the storm. The Innovation Summit in San Francisco wasn't just another speaking gig. She was opening it. First on the stage, every tech executive who mattered would be in that room. She reached for her phone to check her notes one last time when a flight attendant stepped into the aisle beside her. Blonde bob, tight smile, the kind of overly polite tone that made your skin itch before you even knew why. "Miss Monroe?" the woman asked. Danielle looked up. "Yes?" "I'm sorry, but there seems to have been a mix-up with your seat." Danielle blinked. "I picked this seat when I booked." "I understand, and I truly apologize, but another passenger has also been assigned to 1A. We're asking if you could relocate to seat 24C for now while we sort this out." Seat 24C, middle, coach, near the lavatory. Danielle knew without asking. She'd been flying long enough to recognize code. "I'd prefer to stay here while you work it out," she replied, voice calm, eyebrows slightly raised. The attendant's smile didn't flinch. "Unfortunately, we need to seat the other passenger immediately. He's a Platinum Plus Elite member and has requested this seat specifically." Danielle glanced toward the boarding door just in time to see a man step on board, white, mid-50s, expensive overcoat, AirPods already in. Didn't glance at her, didn't need to. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. That's not how she handled things. Instead, she quietly reached for her phone and pressed record. Then she stood, gathered her bag, and walked to 24C. The man slid into 1A like he owned the sky. The flight attendant gave him the kind of smile Danielle hadn't seen in years. Warm, familiar, full of approval. And Danielle sat cramped between a teenager with loud headphones and a man who couldn't stop coughing. She didn't say a word. But 5 minutes later, the seat switch would be the least of their problems. Danielle Monroe was nobody's assistant. She wasn't some mid-level rep hoping for an upgrade. She wasn't a guest of a VIP, and she sure as hell wasn't someone you bumped out of first class without checking twice. Danielle was the founder and CEO of Foresight Logic, a cybersecurity firm based in Durham, North Carolina. What started as a tiny operation in her apartment 12 years ago had grown into a $480 million acquisition just 3 months prior, snatched up by Interglobe Holdings, the same company that happened to own Sky Connect Airlines, the very airline operating Flight 226. The irony? Danielle had just left a virtual meeting with Interglobe's COO, confirming final terms for Foresight Logic to lead a full security overhaul of Sky Connect's passenger data systems. Her name had been on the call invite. She wasn't just on their radar, she was in the control room. But you wouldn't know that just by looking at her. That's what used to bother her most, not the ignorance, but the assumption. She'd sat in rooms full of men who looked past her to speak to her junior engineers. She'd been asked if she was with the catering at conferences where she was the keynote speaker. People never guessed she was the one signing the checks. She stopped correcting them years ago. These days, she just made mental notes, like she did with the flight attendant. Seat 24C wasn't just uncomfortable, it was humiliating. Danielle sat still, legs crossed, trying not to let her expression change. She had the video on her phone now. It clearly showed the exchange. The refusal to explain. The arrival of the man in 1A. The indifference. She watched it twice. Not for proof, for memory. She wanted to remember the tone in the woman's voice, the practiced tilt of her head. That recording wasn't going anywhere just yet. Danielle wasn't someone who went straight to social media. She didn't need likes or retweets. She had real power, the kind that moves silently until it doesn't. The man in 1A eventually ordered a whiskey and opened a paperback, never looked back once. She wondered if he even knew what had happened. Probably not. Men like that didn't ask. They assumed it all worked out in their favor because it usually did. Meanwhile, Danielle's phone buzzed. It was a message from her executive assistant, Tasha Brewster, confirming the press kit was live on the summit's site. Right at the top, opening remarks, Danielle Monroe, CEO of Foresight Logic, now partnered with Interglobe Holdings. Danielle smiled, just barely. She typed back, "Great, let's see if they know who I am now." Then she opened her email and began typing a message. Not to her legal team, not yet. To the COO. Direct line. Subject, incident on Flight 226, Sky Connect Airlines. And while she typed 30,000 feet in the air, someone on the ground was about to make a phone call that would flip the entire flight crew's day upside down. The seatbelt light dinged. The plane tilted gently skyward. Danielle kept typing, even as the cabin rumbled during ascent. Row 24 wasn't made for work. Her elbows bumped against both armrests, and the man beside her coughed again. Wet, phlegmy. She didn't flinch. She just kept her gaze locked on the email, her thumbs moving with precision. Earlier today, prior to departure on Flight 226, I was removed from my assigned seat in 1A without cause or proper explanation. A white male passenger was given the seat instead. I was relocated to economy despite having VIP status and a confirmed reservation. This is a matter of both policy and principle, and I expect a response. Short, sharp, no fluff. She hit send. She didn't expect a reply right away. It was Saturday. Most execs were off-grid until Monday, but the COO, Rhett Wallace, wasn't most execs. He didn't believe in offline, not when the company had just swallowed a new division with a direct link to its digital throat. Foresight Logic wasn't just any startup. Danielle's firm had found the data breach in Sky Connect's booking system last year, the one that nearly leaked 30 million passenger records. It was her team that shut it down, patched it, and prevented a class action lawsuit from making headlines. And now here she was, seat 24C, knees jammed, head tilted to avoid the flickering overhead light, watching a flight crew make small talk and pass snacks like nothing happened. The lead flight attendant walked by again, the same woman. Danielle caught her eye. The woman hesitated. "Is there anything I can get you, Ms. Monroe?" Danielle didn't blink. "No, thank you." It wasn't a kindness. It was theater. She'd recognized Danielle's name now. Maybe from the manifest, maybe from a whispered conversation in the galley. Too late. The damage was done. A teenage girl 2 rows ahead of Danielle turned around and whispered to her mom, "That's the lady from the cyber conference posters." Danielle heard it, didn't respond. She didn't need validation from strangers, but it confirmed one thing. Her face was known. The airline just hadn't done the work to make sure its people knew what kind of passenger they were dealing with. Meanwhile, up in 1A, the man who'd taken her seat had fallen asleep, reclined, shoes off. Danielle closed her eyes for a second, not in anger, in calculation. Because when people show you who they are, she believed them. The attendant had shown her. The airline had shown her. Now it was time for her to show them what she could do. But before Danielle could make her next move, the first ping from corporate would shake the entire cabin crew into silence. It started with a subtle shift. The lead flight attendant's demeanor changed mid-aisle. Eyes darted toward the front, then quickly down to the tablet in her hand. She swallowed, lips tightening like someone trying to keep from saying the wrong thing out loud. Danielle noticed, instantly. Then came the second cue. The intercom crackled, not the captain, not weather updates, just a brief click, followed by whispers near the cockpit door. Danielle leaned back. The message had landed. She tapped her phone. No reply from Rhett Wallace yet, but her assistant, Tasha, had just texted. "FYI, someone from Interglobe PR just called. They're asking if you're on Flight 226. You good?" Danielle replied, "Very." Back in first class, the man in 1A snored gently, oblivious to the tremor running through the crew's pecking order. The flight attendant returned again. This time her voice was lower, her posture tighter. "Ms. Monroe," she said, leaning in awkwardly, "we've just, we've been notified that there was a significant error with the seating arrangement. We'd be happy to move you back to your original seat right away. It's open now." Danielle looked up, eyes calm. "Did the passenger leave?" The woman hesitated. He offered to switch." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Or was he told?" Silence. Danielle's tone didn't change. "I'll stay here." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She didn't want the seat anymore. That seat had already shown her everything she needed to know. She wanted the airline to sit with what they'd done, to feel it. "But I do want something else," Danielle said. The attendant shifted. "Of course. I'd like to speak to the captain before we land." "The captain?" Her voice cracked. "Yes, let him know." The attendant nodded, almost tripping over her words. "Of course, I'll relay the message." Danielle looked out the window. California wasn't far now. She glanced around the cabin. Other passengers were picking up on the tension. They couldn't hear the words, but they saw the behavior, the sidelong glances, the clipped voices, the hushed tones of a team realizing something had gone very wrong. She replayed the video on her phone, this time with the volume on, just loud enough for the woman next to her to hear. The voice of the flight attendant filled the air, calm, firm, unapologetic. "Unfortunately, we need to seat the other passenger immediately." Danielle didn't look at her neighbor. She didn't need to, but someone else nearby leaned over and whispered, "That's messed up." And as Danielle turned the screen off, the ripple was already moving through the cabin faster than turbulence. At 38,000 feet, phones were still in airplane mode. But down on the ground, across a long conference table inside Interglobe's headquarters in Phoenix, Arizona, voices were raised. Rhett Wallace hadn't even finished reading Danielle's email when his phone rang a second time. This time, it was Candace Berryman, Senior VP of Public Relations. She didn't bother with greetings. "We have a situation," she said. "I'm already aware," Rhett replied. "Not fully," Candace shot back. "It's circulating." Rhett sat up straighter. "Her assistant posted a vague tweet," Candace continued. "No names, just, imagine building a company for 12 years, selling it for $500 million, and still getting bumped from your first-class seat because you don't look the part." The tweet had no photo, no airline tagged, just a few dozen retweets so far. But it was spreading fast, and people were connecting dots. Candace read off a few replies. "This sounds like Danielle Monroe. Wait, is this Sky Connect? They just announced a partnership like 2 months ago." It wasn't just a bad look. It was a corporate disaster, and Rhett knew it. He stood up and walked out of the room. "Get someone on the ground in San Francisco. I want a full report before wheels touch down. I want names, flight crew IDs, manifest logs, body cam footage if it exists." Candace paused. "Body cams?" "I don't care," he said. "I want everything." Back in the air, the captain finally stepped out of the cockpit. He walked the length of the cabin, stopping just shy of row 24. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, stiff as a statue. "Miss Monroe?" he asked. Danielle nodded without standing. "I've been informed of the error that occurred earlier in the flight. I want to personally apologize. This doesn't reflect the standards we uphold." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "You're the captain." "Yes, ma'am." "Then let me ask you something directly." "Of course. Would the same thing have happened if I looked like him?" She pointed subtly toward 1A. The captain's jaw moved slightly, but he said nothing. "That's what I thought," Danielle murmured. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was weighted. The captain took a breath. "On behalf of the airline, I'm deeply sorry." Danielle turned her head. "Save it for your HR file." He nodded once, then walked back. Passengers were watching now, openly. Whispers, side glances, texts being typed under tray tables. People were connecting the dots. Because this wasn't just a bad service moment. This was hierarchy exposed. And as the wheels dropped for landing, so did the crew's sense of control over the narrative. The landing was smoother than expected, but the silence inside Flight 226 was tense enough to cut. Danielle remained seated as the cabin shuffled to life. Seatbelts clicked. Overhead bins creaked open. Tired passengers stretched and checked their phones. She didn't rush. She never did. Especially not now. The man in 1A walked off first, oblivious, not a glance back. He might never know he'd been part of something bigger than legroom and whiskey. Danielle stood last. As she exited the jet bridge, two men in dark suits were waiting near the terminal gate. They didn't have name tags. They didn't need them. She recognized the emblem on the clipboard tucked under one man's arm, Interglobe Corporate Security. "Ms. Monroe?" the taller one asked. "Yes." "We've been instructed to escort you to the Sky Connect Executive Lounge. The COO would like to speak with you directly." Danielle didn't blink. "Now?" "Now." She walked with them through Terminal 3 at San Francisco International Airport. Calm, quiet, dignified. A few people turned their heads. One woman actually stopped walking when she recognized Danielle, pulled out her phone, snapped a photo. Just like that, the story picked up another pair of wings. Inside the executive lounge, Rhett Wallace was waiting, tall, clean-cut, wearing an expensive sweater over an unbuttoned collar. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. He stood when Danielle walked in. "Danielle, thank you for taking the time. Please sit." She didn't. "I'd like to begin with a formal apology, on behalf of Sky Connect, on behalf of Interglobe, and on behalf of myself." "An apology doesn't fix a pattern," Danielle said. "It patches a symptom." Rhett nodded, clearly expecting the heat. "We're launching a full internal review. The crew from your flight has been suspended, pending termination. That decision's already in motion." Danielle raised her eyebrows. "That fast?" "You were removed from a reserved seat by a team that didn't follow protocol, didn't verify passenger status, and didn't act with equity. There's no excuse." "And if I didn't have your number?" "We'd still be getting the email. We just would have seen it 6 hours later, on the front page of every outlet that tracks race and corporate accountability." He said it like a man who understood how these things worked now. Visibility wasn't about intention, it was about outcomes. "What else?" she asked. Rhett took a breath. "We'd like you to consider joining our internal review board, equity and policy, flight protocol, hiring and training, full access, no NDA." Danielle was quiet for a long beat. "You want me to help fix what your company didn't even realize was broken?" "Yes." She folded her arms. "I'm not here to clean up your mess, Rhett. I didn't build this system, but I'll tell you what I will do." He waited. "I'll speak at your next leadership summit, on record, on stage, about this flight, about who gets seen and who gets silenced, about what it means when a black woman gets quietly moved to the back and no one says a thing." Rhett nodded slowly. "Understood. And after that," Danielle added, "I'll decide whether I want to help you fix it." And with that, she picked up her bag and walked out, back straight, stride steady, message delivered. The headlines came the next morning. Not loud, not tabloid, just steady, intentional reporting from journalists who had followed Danielle's work for years. Black CEO removed from first-class seat for white passenger, airline crew fired, corporate shakeup underway. That was the title. But the real story wasn't about the seat. It was about what happens when someone with power stays quiet long enough to be underestimated, then speaks so clearly no one can look away. Danielle never shared the video publicly. She didn't need to. She gave her talk at the Interglobe Leadership Summit 2 weeks later, stood on that stage in Phoenix, in front of 400 executives in suits, holding nothing but a wireless mic and the room's attention. She didn't yell. She didn't shame. She told the story like she was talking to a room full of neighbors. She described the moment she was asked to move, the look on the attendant's face, the tone, the tight smile. She spoke about the weight of being watched all the time by people who don't know they're watching you, but are judging you anyway. She talked about growing a company while being mistaken for support staff, about rooms that only acknowledge you after your value's been proven, and sometimes not even then. And when she finished, she paused. Then she said, "You don't have to mean harm to cause it. But once you see the harm, that's when the real test starts. What you do next, that's your character. That's your company." Silence. Then applause. Real applause. Not polite, not forced, but grounded. Afterward, 3 different regional directors approached her about training programs. One asked her to join the advisory board for hiring reform. Another invited her to consult with their supplier diversity team. Danielle didn't say yes to everything, but she didn't say no either. She knew this wasn't about her alone. It never was. She hadn't been removed from a seat because someone didn't know. She was removed because someone assumed she didn't belong. And people paid for that assumption, not because Danielle wanted revenge, but because the system finally bumped into someone who had receipts, a record, and reach. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was focused. A few weeks later, a woman from her flight, a passenger who'd witnessed the whole thing from a few rows back, sent Danielle a handwritten letter. It said, "You didn't say a word, and still, everyone heard you. Thank you." Danielle kept that note, not out of pride, but because it reminded her of what mattered most. Not the seat, not the applause, not even the policy changes, but the people who were watching quietly, wondering if they were the only ones. They weren't, and now they knew. If this story made you think about how easy it is to ignore quiet harm, ask yourself, when was the last time you saw something unfair and stayed silent? Don't wait until someone else speaks up. Be the one who does, because silence protects power, and power unchecked always repeats itself. Speak, stand. Even if your seat feels safe, stand for the ones who can't yet.